This channel is supported by Truefire. Truefire is an online library
enough, you can get the Truefire All Access Pass for as cheap as they ever do it, the $99 thing, so just jump and do that if you're looking for... I've yet to talk to anyone at Boss about the Plugout effects at this point, but I have done work for Boss in the past. It's not... I don't have anything against Boss at all, but I thought it was kind of, at the time when this came out, important to speak about, you know, companies potentially changing the way that things are being done within the guitar gear space, because it's actually sort of, I think Boss is one of those corporations that do dominate the space in some ways, and apparently sort of like margin for retailers is not huge on Boss products, is what I've been told. So it's kind of like they have like a big chunk of control over parts of the space. Over other parts, they don't really seem to have as much sway as I guess maybe they'd like. But it is a big corporation. Anyway, so the Plugout effects comes out, and I guess we should have seen signs of this, maybe. But they had this Roland Cloud thing, and I did a video on that last year where they were looking for people to subscribe to that, and there was a free trial. So I checked out the free trial, and I did see some definite things within the Roland Cloud that, if you're a producer or a professional in this space, did make sense. You know, like the Juno, there were bits and pieces like that. Now, they also within that brought out these Boss effects that were 8 digital effects that you could run in your DAW as a plugin, and there were some odd choices, you know, including the Spectrum, including a Boss OD1, which I like the idea of, including a slow gear, some bits and pieces, and they would go on to be, you know, essentially what the Plugout effects is, and the idea was that you have your plug in, your plug out. Now, at the time that this thing, I bought one before I'd seen people talk about sort of this microtransaction-y bit, because I was kind of like, well, what's that all about then? And then Rhett and KDH did videos essentially saying that they were doing microtransactions in this pedal requiring a subscription. It's somewhere in there is the truth of it, which is that essentially it comes loaded with 8 of the models, and you have to log on using a Roland Cloud membership, which is free, but you have to give them your details, and then go through the process on the app of adding the additional 8 algorithms that are available at launch but are not actually on the pedal yet. Now, someone else speculated, I think it was Science Aloud, that that's essentially like conditioning you to get used to this experience of using the app to make purchases, and he called, I can't remember what he called, but there was a scientific study where, you know, like if you give rats a certain, there was a name of it, a box, some sort of box. My memory's gone. It's gone. Anyway, but it was like a box where you reward a rat for a certain type of behavior, and even if you remove the reward, they will continue doing that kind of behavior. It's a bit of a sinister thing, he made it sound like. Anyway, so, but there was a lot of negativity around it, understandably, I think, because like with the Kemper player, I think a lot of us guitarists at least have it in mind that we don't want to get into this space where you're paying, like in the digital realm, for upgrades that other companies would just ordinarily be doing for free. And I totally get that, and I think Eventide have moved away from that kind of model as well. This was one of the things that people were saying, well, look, Eventide did this and no one, shouted them out for doing this kind of thing. And I just think it was a slightly different time, whereas 2025, we've got like 10 years now of like the Helix and Fractal and people like that, line 6, I've already said line 6, but, saying, once you've bought this piece of gear, as we do the upgrades, you'll get these upgrades. For whatever reason, goodwill, good promotion, I guess the opposite of whatever this is done, which is, I guess, quite negative PR. Now, there is a way, and I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again, that Boss, I think, can absolutely save this. Now, apparently it's quite a small team of engineers working at Boss, actually working on these products. They've just recently come out with what I think is actually now top tier pitch shifting stuff. I would say that I've tested it against my buddy David Beebe's Digitech Drop. It's lower latency, and I think tonally it does a bit of a better job in my own sort of testing. At least on par with the Digitech Drop is like the very least you could say about it. But it's got some incredible features like the detune, and the fact that you can plug in the expression pedal like you can with this. Now, under the hood, are these both running similar sort of chips and stuff like that? Is, I guess, the first thing you'd have to establish as being true. And are they capable of running different algorithms? And if that is the case, which I see no reason necessarily that there be an entirely different sort of chipset, like normally the thing that companies of this sort of size do is kind of have some element of like consistency between their products. So assuming, and this is an assumption, but I'm guessing it's a fairly logical one, that the plugins that they've made for this, or the algorithms, are somewhat similar to the plugins that they've made here, and that the hardware underneath is somewhat similar too, then could we not see a situation where the Plugout has the option, and maybe you do this as a paid update thing, but this is exactly the thing that I think might actually be useful. So say you bring out your Polyshifter XS1. Now, if you want that pedal just for that pedal's sake, go out and you buy the physical Polyshifter XS1. If you already own a Plugout, there's an option, potentially, you go into your little app, and for £10, they've made this at launch of the XS1 available in the Plugout Effects app. I think that would have made a ton of sense to do. They've already talked about, like, in January they're going to be bringing across like the Boss Dimension and a couple of other bits and pieces, which again I'm not enthused about the idea that you'd have to pay for those upgrades, but I do understand that if you're spending time programming those and creating those, that maybe you don't want to just give them away for free. And if that is the case, okay, fine. But the Polyshifter XS1 could have been an opportunity to say, well, actually, here, look, the Plugout Effects, you've seen that this can do great pitch shifting stuff. We've made that available so that instead of spending, 200 quid on the XS1, you could run that algorithm in the much maligned Plugout Effects, and it will be whatever amount of money they want to charge for that algorithm. So I think that, to me, would have made sense as a strategy. And knowing that they had these two things in production, I think it's a little bit of a missed opportunity already. And I do think that there is a bunch of other stuff that I'd love to see in the Boss PX1, which is, this is at the moment sort of positioned as a thing which is giving you access to some of the legendary Boss effects that you can no longer buy, like the SP1 Spectrum, or the OD1, which was discontinued after about 3 or 4 years, or the slow gear that was in production for about 3 or 4 years and you can't get access to really. I think there's that's one angle, like the nostalgia thing, which is maybe a small audience, but I do think there is a core audience of people that need a pedal that can do pitch shifting, that need a pedal that could do some like legitimately good sounding phaser, legitimately good sounding tremolo, and the OC2 in there as well. Like, it does stuff well. Or the SD1, you know, does that sound as good as other drive pedals that I've got? Absolutely. Like, they've not done a bad job of the actual sounds themselves. And I don't mind the design at all. I think some people have not been huge fans of that, but I think it's absolutely fine. It's more about, okay, now what? What are you going to do with it? And just, you know, there's paid upgrades of like things like a Dimension chorus where, to be honest, like you can get that algorithm in other places. Would it be nice to have an official Boss one? Maybe, but if you've got like a legitimate thing that Boss do very well, like this pitch shifting, or like in the past, like the Fender Spring Reverb, or, you know, you've got things like the dual stereo delay things and bits and pieces like that. Put some of your specialist stuff in here, and maybe even like, what do we have from Boss that can do like glitch delay type stuff? Like, work on some pedals that are, or not pedals, but sounds that are a little bit more out there, that are not yet accessible in Boss format. And I think suddenly you'd have a pedal that is maybe a little bit, like you could put some of your algorithms that are a little bit out there on here. Maybe you give like a couple of settings from the RV6, the reverb, or a couple of settings from the bigger delay boys. And suddenly the ecosystem for the Plugout effects looks a little bit more rich and has a bit more of a defined reason for existing. Maybe you give some of those updates as free, as like a sign of goodwill or whatever. And maybe if it's something that's like a current release, you can say, well, look, you can actually get this in your Plugout effects for £10. I think that is a situation where many more people, I think, might be a bit more happy about that as a scenario. I can see a future scenario where, you know, say Boss were bringing out their Space Echo pedal, like that was like this sort of size. You'd say, well, look, the algorithm's available in the Plugout effects. Buy it for £10. I totally see that this could be a thing. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Are you interested in that as a concept, or do you think you've got to throw the plug out with the bathwater? I made that joke before, didn't I? Cheers for stopping by.